Kelly, thank you for being here with me today.
Yeah, excited to be here. Love what you're doing, and really love working with families to help educate them on a difficult but fun process of recruiting.
What advice would you give, parents, players when it comes to the recruiting process, like just not feeling overwhelmed?
What I normally tell families is you need to have some type of filter to help you narrow down all the possibilities. There's probably a lot of players out there that can go sit on the bench at the Division I level, but that may not be the right soccer level for you because you want to play. And so maybe it's a Division II or Division III. And I've recruited tons of guys over the years that we thought, he's kind of a support guy for us, but he would be a Division III All-American. And that's not to slight Division III because it's a good level, but it just depends on what you want out of your soccer experience. So to summarize, it would be location, academic level. Got to like the people you're going to be around a lot, which is coaches and players. And then you have to make sure the level fits you.
Through that whole process, right? How do we make that less intimidating and less complicated, without diving too deep? What should be the mindset to not feel intimidated through that?
The first thing I would say is make your own list. I think one of the mistakes that families make is that they wait for people to come to them. And so part of the recruiting process is, make yourself recruitable. It's kind of like if there's a girl that you really like in your class, like, what do you need to do to try and attract that girl? Like, who do you need to become? And so it's kind of that dance of like, okay, where do I want to go? And then I want to make myself recruitable for that school. So I'm trying to show value because it fits me, instead of I go play the tournament and I'm waiting for coaches to reach out to me. So a proactive recruiting approach with a filter is important.
You mentioned some of these, but what are some other common mistakes, that you've seen families make or that you've heard families making kind of through that recruitment process?
One of the biggest mistakes is limiting your choices based on the level of soccer. There's a lot of really good Division II, Division III, NAIA teams out there, and there's some really good Division I teams, and there's some really bad Division I teams. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes is, I want to be a Division I player, so I'm going to count out a school that actually fits my filter. It's a great location. I like the coaches. I have a couple of my friends who went there. They have, I don't know, whatever major you think, you want. And then, I can play a lot.
That process, you talked about players being able to, self-promotion is a big part of what they need to do, and not waiting for coaches to reach out to them. When should they really be engaging in that recruiting process, or at least start that engagement?
But junior year is really important. Fall of your junior year is when I would really start that in earnest and really get serious. The spring of your junior year, and a lot of that finishes. A lot of schools are done in the spring of a guy's junior year, a girl's junior year, and then some schools are more a senior year process. But for sure, fall of your junior year.
You mentioned players building lists and kind of getting their list together and doing a lot of that research. Should a lot of that be done before their junior year? Before they're kind of going into the serious reach out and going and visiting schools?
Absolutely. I think the other thing, if you get that filter, what also happens is that, you've got this list of schools, what you're looking at, and then you go to an event or someone else tells you about another school that might fit. It's easy to add them in. Right. And so I think that does leave you a little bit of, like, you've kind of negated other schools and said, right now, I've still got the opportunity to add schools in if you start your junior year. But yeah, I think if you can get that filter down, in your summer leading in your junior year, got an idea of where I fit academically, what my soccer level looks like, what I want that experience to look like. It just helps you kind of getting into it. And then you're not wasting a trip going to whatever school it might be in their ID camp because they invited you and you have no interest in that actually.
What's the best way for players to be seen? They're always like, well, should I go to this event? Should I go to this camp? Should I play it with this team or play with that team? What's the best way to be seen? Or is there one answer, or is it a mix?
It's definitely a mix. I mean, I think, obviously being on the best team you could possibly be on says a lot about you, right? If you're on a good team, that probably means you're a good player. The bigger events are what coaches normally go and attend because there's more good players there in one location, which just makes recruiting efficient.
Players always come with the questions, what camp should I go to? This camp? Should I go to that camp? And will I be seen at this camp? Is it being taken seriously? Is this a real thing?
I would definitely recommend going to the day and a half ID camps that are typically less expensive. So, you can get into, most of those are $100, $150 at the location of the school because you can guarantee that staff is going to be there. I also think a lot of times coaches hire their players to work the camp. Sometimes the players are playing in and around the camp as demonstrators, and you need an extra number, and you really get insight into it. So
kind of transitioning back to kind of self-promotion and having that ready to go, and once you kind of get that, start to dial that in and get your filters, like you said, what's the best way to now reach out and contact those coaches?
A couple of things is, depending on where you're at in the recruiting cycle, I think your first contact is always going to be an email. Your second contact should be, hopefully by phone if you've gotten a response. So, and texting is great. Having a good player profile with a picture of yourself, make sure it's updated, looks sharp, GPA on there. I think the nuts and bolts of recruiting come down to in self-promotion. You want to make sure that you have all of the contact people that know you, because I always like when I find that, I know a guy that knows Dustin Swinehart, and I call Dustin, hey, what's this kid like? Oh, he's a great kid. Is he a good player? Yeah, he's a good player. Then we come see him play. If I call Dustin and he says, you know what, I'm not sure he'd fit in with, your culture, okay, then he's out. The next thing I'd say, which, impacts obviously Sporstreelz directly, is have a really good highlight video. Also have 2 halves of a couple of separate games that are good games. And what I mean by good games are they're a high level game.
With everything video, how's that changed the game over the years and more recently? How has that changed the communication with players giving you updates, or you requesting information?
What I would say is as much video as you can possibly gather on yourself and use to promote yourself is really valuable. I know Sporstreelz allows you to make clips, and I think instead of saying, hey, it's great to have a half, if you could get every touch or every play that you're involved in, that does make a big difference, because we're trying to be efficient. Imagine if we get, 10, we're recruiting 10 to 12 guys seriously in a class, and we get every game of theirs from a showcase. That's 30 games to watch, which is fine. But if we can get their touches and the important actions that they had in the game, that actually helps us quite a bit to be more efficient. And obviously we're going to see what you do. As many videos as you can get, doesn't have to just be from a showcase. I think as much of that as you can gather and pass on. And like we're saying, from a promotional standpoint, if you can send like, hey, here's like, my 20 clips from the game, and they don't have to be all great clips, they're just 20 clips. That's a huge way for us to get insight into you and keep track of where you're progressing. I'll tell you, one of my favorite players to recruit is a player that I see all the time. It's really easy to know that, like, okay, I've watched this guy train for the last 3 years. One of my best players ever was a guy named Matt Hedges, still plays for FC Dallas. I knew him since he was 13 years old when I was at Butler, and he was on my ODP team. I saw him train. He grew a lot, so he's a little uncoordinated early, but I got to see him and track him. So one way to do that would be consistent video that you're able to show coaches when they can't come see you train and see you develop.
But depending on if they're in that sophomore, junior year, whether maybe they can, coaches can reach out, maybe they can't yet. What should updates look like? If they haven't received any kind of feedback.
Great question. It's always good to know that someone really wants to come to your school. I know everywhere I've ever been and every coach I've ever, all my friends that I talk to, if there's a player that really wants to come to your school, you're going to make an effort to go out and see them play. You're going to track them. So I think it is important to be consistent in your communication. I do think, once you get into a point where people can communicate, you're going to get more direct feedback, but you might get an early camp email from somebody because that's the only thing they could do your sophomore year. They may only be able to say, hey, attend our camp. And now you have to figure out, okay, they may not be interested or they might be. So I think like balancing that out, again, having a filter will help you decide. Your club coaches can actually help quite a bit with this. So, one, and we didn't talk about this, but go to your club coach and say, hey, do you think I could play at Wake Forest? Your club coach is like, no. Okay, then take that off my list. It fits my filter, but I'm not going to be able to play there.
And now that social media is kind of forming into where players can also kind of have some sort of profile there. First off, how much are you using social media as a coach, or your coaching staff using social media to learn about your recruits or find recruits?
What you put on your social media does matter. You know, if you're starting to put a bunch of crazy things on there, that's not going to benefit you or make you recruitable for us. So, you know, backing up a little bit, we can do certain things within NCAA rules, and everybody's starting to do that. We want to know that guys know we're following, which again, I'm not exactly sure, like follow, like there's differences there. So I think if a coach likes what you're doing, clearly they're letting you know that they're interested there, but they can't maybe follow you. And there's some different parameters that seem to change every week.
Maybe it's they're a few months into their junior year, you know, and they haven't heard anything back. Is there, I mean, what advice would you give them? Would it be to kind of find a new way of communication? You know, if they've tried email, make sure they move to that second step of communication, like you said, maybe through their club.
And then once you do reach out to a school that is maybe fits every single thing in your filter and you don't hear back, the next step would be, and whether that's email or you happen to have their phone number, I think it's really valuable to have your club coach call. And I'll tell you, you know, for college coaches, you need to have a good network of people that you trust and you have relationships with and that you've built over time. So if your club coach calls me, I know that you may not be a player we're interested in, but I may have a player in 2 years or on your next team or even on your team that I want to keep recruiting. So I'm going to have a conversation with your club coach. I may let you down easy through your club coach, but you want to know that anyway, because if that school's on your list and you need to take them off, that's okay. It's okay. It's not an option for you. So I would say once you have that initial contact, you don't hear back, I'm really, really interested in the school. You can go ask your club coach, do you think I can play there? If your club coach tells you no, then I would just scratch him off my list. If your club coach is, you know what, let me see, I think you would be a good fit there and I can do that legwork for you. I think that's a great way to kind of either know, okay, we're going to move forward with the school or I'm not.
Are there any final words, advice you'd want to say? You know, maybe it's something on the mental side of people just kind of going through this and staying positive and kind of, you know, not quitting when they're, you know, in the middle of the process.
You know, you said it when we started that the recruiting process is intimidating, but I would liken it to a player development process. You know, a player development process is not a straight line in any way, shape, or form. The second thing is just keep going in the process like you have to do in a game. If you have a couple bad passes or bad blocks or, you know, whatever sport you're playing in, like you don't quit in the game. So yeah, you get a couple no's, you get a couple yeses, this doesn't work, that didn't work. Okay, just keep going and that school will come there. And, you know, I would say the big thing is don't panic either. You know, if the timeline's not going like you think, you know, you're not trying to keep up with the Joneses. So don't worry about Jenny or Johnny or whatever they're doing. It's your recruiting process. So just stick to the plan, keep going forward, and then really, you know, make sure that you find the school that fits you and don't worry about what everybody else is doing.